June 21, 1944, above the skies of Western Europe. 1,000 feet shimmered with sunlight and the trembling roar of engines. Hundreds of silver P-51, Mustangs and olive drab B-17 flying, fortresses glinted in the morning haze, their contrails stitching the heavens like white scars. The crews inside were young, barely in their 20s, but already veterans of death. They had names written on their aircraft. Lucky Lady, Miss Helen, Heaven Can Wait. And that morning, as they crossed into enemy skies, something unthinkable began to happen. American pilots were shooting down their own planes. No one understood it at first. 1 second, the sky was filled with formation discipline. Tight, perfect, beautiful geometry of war. The next, tracer fire erupted between friendly wings. A B-17 suddenly caught fire, spiraling into a cloud of black smoke while its escorting Mustang banked sharply, avoiding debris from the very bomber it had just destroyed. The radio channels erupted in chaos. Blue leader, what the hell are you doing? That's friendly. Repeat, that's friendly fire. But amid the confusion, no clear answer came. For years, this horrifying phenomenon remained buried beneath the chaos of war. Many dismissed it as pilot error, combat stress, or fog of war. But those who were there, those who saw their comrades fall by friendly hands, never forgot. They whispered about something deeper, something the public was never told. A hidden chapter of the air war over Europe, born from fear, desperation, and deception. The U.S. Army Air Forces, at the height of their power in 1944, had grown into a colossal machine. Over 12,000 bombers crisscrossed Europe daily, escorted by the sleek new P-51s that finally gave American crews a chance to survive against the deadly Luftwaffe. Yet success brought new nightmares. The Germans, beaten in the air but not broken, began to strike back in ways no one expected, by turning American planes against each other. It started with Operation Bodenplatte preparations deep inside Germany. Luftwaffe engineers and intelligence officers were experimenting with captured American aircraft, meticulously studying their paint schemes, radio frequencies, and squadron markings. They repainted German fighters, particularly the Messerschmitt, Bf-109s and Fw-19s, to look exactly like American planes. From a distance, even trained U.S. pilots couldn't tell the difference. And when those disguised fighters slipped into Allied formations at high altitude, chaos followed. But it wasn't just German deception. By mid-1944, the skies were a storm of electronic signals, radios, radar jammers, IFF transponders, and many units had mismatched or outdated codes. In that confusion, some Mustangs genuinely thought their own bombers were enemy aircraft. One wrong flick of a switch could erase an entire crew. On June 21st, over western France, it happened again. Captain Robert Bobby Hayes, a 23-year-old squadron leader from Iowa, was flying escort for a group of B-17s returning from a strike on synthetic fuel plants near Ludwigshafen. Visibility was perfect. No enemy fighters reported. Then from the sun's glare, a group of aircraft appeared, P-51, silver and clean. Hayes assumed they were reinforcements. Within seconds, tracers ripped through the formation. "Those are ours," someone screamed over the radio. But in the chaos, nobody knew who ours really meant anymore. Hayes dived, rolled, and tried to signal with his wings. His eyes caught a glint on one of the attacking planes, a slightly off shade of silver, and beneath the wing, faint black crosses that had been hastily painted over. His stomach turned. "They're fakes!" He yelled, too late. Below him, a B-17 called Mary Jane exploded midair. At the same time, Allied intelligence units in England began receiving scattered reports. Pilots describing friendly aircraft that turned hostile, markings that looked American but weren't, and bomber crews who swore the planes that attacked them carried U.S. stars. Most were dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations. Only later, when wreckages were examined, did investigators find evidence of German paint, false insignia, and even American uniforms found in downed Luftwaffe fighters. But the truth was worse than anyone realized. By July 1944, the Allies owned the skies. Germany's once feared Luftwaffe was bleeding to death, losing pilots faster than it could train replacements. But as their strength waned, their cunning grew. Deep within airfields hidden in forested pockets of western Germany, the Luftwaffe's special deception units, nicknamed Wild Sow Ghost Squadrons, were experimenting with captured Allied aircraft. These teams repainted and reconfigured them to resemble American fighters and bombers. Their goal wasn't victory, it was chaos. On certain mornings as American bomber streams climbed toward targets, radar operators in England would pick up unknown signals flying in formation with them. Commanders assumed they were delayed squadrons joining the mission. But inside those mysterious formations were German pilots wearing American jackets, flying planes painted with U.S. roundels, and transmitting in English on stolen frequencies. They would slip into the bomber stream, open fire for a few seconds, then vanish back toward the clouds. The result was horrifying. B-17 crews began distrusting their own escorts. Pilots grew hesitant to engage enemies, afraid of hitting friends. Some even refused to fire at all. Captain Hayes, haunted by what he'd seen over western France, couldn't sleep. The vision of Mary Jane burning haunted him every night. "How do you tell who's who?" he told a fellow pilot. "When the sky is full of your own planes?" The question echoed across every airfield in England. Air intelligence units, desperate to stop the bloodshed, launched an investigation called Operation Mirror. Technicians compared paint pigments, fuselage shapes, and serial fonts to develop a quick visual test for authenticity. They even instructed American pilots to fire recognition flares before entering bomber formations, an idea that backfired when German pilots started copying the signal colors. Some friendly fire wasn't caused by German trickery at all. It came from American nerves snapping under pressure. After months of endless missions, sleepless nights, and witnessing entire squadrons vanish into flames, pilots were breaking down. One study later found that more than a quarter of all friendly shootdowns during mid-1944 weren't accidents of identification, they were psychological collapses. The skies over Europe weren't just filled with bullets, they were filled with paranoia. At one base in East Anglia, a bomber crew was grounded after refusing to fly with a certain escort group they accused of firing on them. The escort group, in turn, filed reports claiming the bombers had opened fire first. Neither side could prove who was right. What they didn't know was that the enemy had begun exploiting exactly that fear. In August, the Allies intercepted a chilling German transmission referencing Project Grafe, a plan originally devised by Otto Skorcini for ground operations using English-speaking German soldiers in stolen U.S. uniforms, but documents later revealed a similar air-based version had been tested too, using pilots fluent in English. Those missions, rare and deadly, blurred the line between friend and foe even further. Then came September 1944, the month everything changed. During a massive raid toward Bremen, American formations met no resistance for nearly an hour. Then, as the bombers turned home, a cluster of Mustangs appeared at their side. They had the same checkerboard nose markings as the 357th Fighter Group, same paint, same formation style. The bomber crews cheered, "Our boys are here," until the Mustangs suddenly banked inward and opened fire. Within seconds, 4 bombers were burning. A 5th exploded, sending shards of aluminum spiraling across the sky. In the chaos, one gunner managed to hit one of the attackers. When wreckage was recovered days later, investigators found something shocking. The Mustang's engine was German-made. Its serial number traced back to a captured P-51 flown from a Luftwaffe test center near Reckling. This revelation forced the Allies to confront what many had whispered for months. Germany was flying fake. American planes and American pilots, unable to tell the difference, were now firing on both, sometimes destroying real allies, sometimes destroying the disguised enemy. The war in the air had turned into a mirror, each side reflecting the other's shape, until no one knew what was real anymore. In the following weeks, new rules came down from command. Every Allied aircraft had to carry new recognition stripes, thick black and white bands on wings and fuselages to separate them from German imposters. The change helped, but not enough. Radio chaos still reigned, and exhausted men still made fatal mistakes. By November 1944, historians estimate that more than 400 American aircraft had been shot down in friendly fire incidents over Europe, a grim statistic almost no one talked about publicly. The official record sanitized it as accidental losses, but to the men who survived, it was something far more haunting, proof that in modern war, confusion was the most powerful weapon of all. Winter crept across Europe like a gray shroud. By December 1944, the Allied advance had pushed deep into German territory. Towns lay in ruins, forests burned, and the once dominant Luftwaffe had been reduced to fragments of its former self. Yet even in its dying days, it managed one last act of chaos, the infamous Operation Bodenplatte. Launched on New Year's Day 1945, its purpose was simple: to cripple Allied air power by destroying aircraft on the ground. But hidden within the plan was an echo of the deception that had haunted American skies for months. Many German planes used American-style markings again, fooling radar operators and ground observers just long enough to get close before unleashing hell. The result was devastating confusion. Allied anti-aircraft units, unsure who was friend or foe, opened fire on anything with wings. Dozens of American and British planes were shot down by their own guns before anyone realized what was happening. The nightmare had come full circle. In the operations room at RAF Duxford, Captain Robert "Bobby" Hayes stood silently before a wall of casualty charts. Red pins marked confirmed enemy kills. Black pins marked friendly losses. The black ones were spreading faster. For every German plane they downed, 2 or 3 Allied aircraft fell to misidentification or panic. Hayes clenched his fists. He had spent months reporting the incidents, warning superiors, and demanding clearer recognition protocols. But bureaucracy in wartime moved slower than death. By February 1945, intelligence teams finally compiled a classified report detailing the extent of friendly fire over Europe. It was never released to the public. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of aircraft, thousands of lives, erased not by enemy skill, but by confusion, exhaustion, and fear. By February 1945, intelligence teams finally compiled a classified report detailing the extent of friendly fire over Europe. It was never released to the public. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of aircraft, thousands of lives, erased not by enemy skill, but by confusion, exhaustion, and fear. Among the report's findings were recovered fragments of captured American planes that had been modified and used by German pilots. Investigators identified fake P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs fitted with German radio systems. Some had crude American stars painted over old Luftwaffe markings, while others were nearly indistinguishable from the real thing. Even their flight patterns mimicked U.S. tactics, studied for months of observation. But the most shocking revelation came from post-war interrogations of captured German pilots. One, identified only as Lieutenant Karl Kruger, admitted that his squadron had used 2 captured Mustangs during missions over the Rhine. He described how their mission wasn't to win dogfights. It was to make American pilots doubt their own eyes. If they hesitate, he said coldly, they die. If they fire too soon, they kill their own. Either way, we win. That statement haunted Allied analysts for years. When the war ended in May 1945, Europe celebrated freedom. But for the pilots who had lived through the friendly fire nightmare, victory felt hollow. Many returned home carrying guilt heavier than any medal. In debriefings, some admitted they could no longer tell a friend's silhouette from an enemy's. They'd seen too many fall by mistake. The skies that had once represented glory now felt cursed. Captain Hayes was among them. After the war, he returned to Iowa and never flew again. His neighbors called him a hero. He just nodded politely. But every night he replayed that June morning. The burning wreck of Mary Jane. The horror of realizing it wasn't the enemy who had killed her but them. The pilots who survived rarely spoke about it. For them, it wasn't just a story of war. It was a story of guilt. Some had shot down friends. Others had watched helplessly as imposters destroyed their comrades. Powerless to intervene, they all carried the same wound. The unbearable question of who they had really been fighting in those final, blinding months over Europe. Today, when historians revisit the air war of World War II, they often celebrate the heroism, the aircraft, the victories. But hidden beneath those triumphs lies this quiet, haunting truth, that in the fog of battle, even the bravest could lose sight of what was real, and perhaps that is the cruelest irony of all. Because in those frozen skies amid contrails and chaos, the enemy wasn't always in front of them. Sometimes it was flying right beside them. In the vast silence that followed the war, few spoke of the men who died by friendly hands. Their stories were lost between victory speeches and parades, buried in the smoke that still lingered above Europe. But every once in a while, A veteran would look up at a contrail and whisper to himself, "We thought we were shooting the enemy." But the truth was far more painful.